Hey folks, I'm Chris and I'm your Commander Mechanic. There are some weird beliefs we as Magic players hold, like playing fewer colors in your deck means you can play fewer lands, or you don't have mana issues if you play more mana rocks. But one of the weirdest ones to me is that people think ramp spells are better than lands. The term ramp in Magic has several origins, like Rampant Growth, one of the most classic examples of a card that ramps you ahead in your mana curve. Your mana curve is a visual display of the casting costs of all the cards in your deck and detail your lowest mana value, highest mana value, and most importantly, your average mana value. Ramping up your mana curve means jumping a turn or two ahead in mana production. If you play a Sol Ring on turn 1, you have ramped ahead of everyone else by 2 whole turns. A Kodama's Reach ramps you ahead by 1 land or a whole turn, while securing you a land drop for next turn too. Effects that put lands in hand, like an Armillary Sphere, aren't ramp effects because they do nothing to make mana or put lands that make mana into play. And that is an important distinction. We call mana rocks and ramp spells must-haves in deck building, but we forget why they're must-haves, because they get you ahead in mana generation. Producing 4 mana on turn 3 is ahead of the curve, which is determined by the lowest common denominator of playing a single land per turn. If someone isn't ramping, they better be playing a land each turn. And that's one of the biggest issues I see people building decks make. They forsake lands in favor of rocks and ramps. Those two things need to be used together. Playing talismans or signets aren't an excuse to run fewer lands. You need to find the balance that allows you to play a land every turn and use rocks and ramp as a way to get ahead of only playing a single land a turn. The number of times I see someone say, "It's okay to run 30 lands if I play 12 or 15 rocks," it is staggering. Just check out my recent video on volume of lands, linked up top, and the comments are full of this misconception. If you're cutting lands in favor of rocks, you are removing free mana generation in favor of paid mana generation. You're casting a mana rock today because you are betting that you will miss a land drop later, and that is not the purpose of these cards in a deck. What you should be doing is looking to reach your critical turns faster. Your critical turn is the turn you go from casting 1 spell per turn on average to the turn you're casting 2 spells a turn, or casting a big impactful spell, or creating game-winning synergies. This is typically 2 times your average mana value. If your average mana value in your deck is 2, your critical turn is when you can generate 4 mana. If your average mana value is 3, your critical turn is when you reach 6 mana. If it's an average of 4 mana, your critical turn is when you hit 8 mana generation. And the role of rocks and ramp in your deck is to get you this turn ahead of curve. Not waiting to turn 8 to play a land each turn, but supplementing your land drop each turn with casting mana generating resources. It is a long-held belief that the player that spends the most mana wins the most games. And if you're spending 4 mana a turn while your opponents are spending 3 mana a turn, you're ahead, you're winning. With that being said, how do we determine how many rocks or pieces of ramp we should be playing? What's the right balance? Once again, let's look at averages. Bring out the chalkboard! We're once again working on mathematical averages here, so a big asterisk for everyone. Shuffling adds variance to our decks, but we can roughly look at it as 1 card equals 1%, since we're working with a 99 or 98 card deck. But our odds of drawing any 1 card in our deck are limitless, so we'll try to play to averages. So, let's say you're building your deck with a perceived standard of 10 combined rocks and ramp spells. This means that 10% of your deck is aimed at getting you ahead of the curve permanently. We can consider rituals ramp spells even though they generate temporary mana instead of permanent mana, but since they don't stick around forever, they aren't a long-term solution. If you're running 10 pieces of rocks and ramp, you're likely to see 1 piece within your first 10 cards drawn, or by turn 3 on average. As we established in my lands video, depending on the number of lands you're running, with even a low land count like 30, we will see our 3rd land within 10 cards. But that means ramp spells like Gilded Lotus or Thran Dynamo are useless at this stage because you haven't drawn enough land to cast them yet, and you won't be playing them at earliest until you draw 1 to 2 more lands. But lower mana value ramp, like classic 2 mana rocks and ramp spells, fall into the sweet spot here. You can cast a ramp spell on turn 2 or 3 to get you ahead. But you then need to be concerned about drawing that next land card sooner to stay ahead of the curve. The moment you miss a land drop, that mana rock is nothing but a land that you have paid mana for. Let's double the number of ramp spells in our deck to 20. Now we have a chance to draw a ramp spell 1 in every 5 cards in our deck, almost a guarantee of having one in our opening hand. This means we know we can hit 4 mana on turn 3. What comes into question is if we'll be hitting 5 mana on turn 4, or if we're going to be missing a land drop because we haven't struck the right balance of land and ramp. And that is the biggest deck building mistake here. Thinking that ramp spells and mana rocks replace lands. No, they supplement land. If you need to be hitting enough mana to cast your 4 mana value commander on turn 3, then you need to be running a saturation of rocks and ramp that ensures you draw a castable card ahead of that time. If you need to be at 6 mana on turn 4, then you better be able to cast 2 ramp spells by then, meaning you need a saturation of enough lands to be drawing and playing 1 per turn, while also having enough ramp to be 2 turns ahead. But Chris, I hear you say, I've run 40 lands in my deck and I still get mana screwed, or I get flooded. Haha, well that's variance for you, and there is an enemy of variance that we will talk about next time. My advice for finding the right number of rocks or ramp cards in your deck is to take the number of turns you need to be ahead and have 10 pieces per turn. If you need to be spending 3 mana on turn 2, include all of the free or 1 mana ramp spells like Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, and Moxes if that's the power level you're going for. If you need to be spending 4 mana on turn 3, make sure your ramp costs no more than 2 mana, talismans, signets, and ramp spells. If you need to be spending 6 mana on turn 5, then your ramp can be 4 mana ramp, like Thran Dynamo, Explosive Vegetation, or Nyx Lotus. For every turn you need to be further ahead, 6 mana on turn 4 for instance, double the number of ramps and rocks, 20 pieces. Rituals work fine here too. But the number one thing is that you can't cut lands in favor of ramp and mana rocks, because consistency in drawing lands keeps you on curve, while your rocks get you ahead of it. These two parts of your deck work together, not against each other. Do not cut lands in favor of rocks and ramp. What do you think? How far up your mana curve do you need to be in most instances? Do you find yourself cutting lands in favor of an early mana rock more often than not? Is it more about short-term satisfaction rather than long-term consistency? Let me know in the comments below. A special thanks to my sponsor Moxfield. They are the best deck building platform in the world and help ensure that your decks have clear mana curves, you understand average mana values, and can see sample hands to give you the confidence that you've built a more consistent deck. Follow the link in the description to my profile and follow me while you're there. Check out these other videos on the channel. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share because we are growing every day. And as always folks, good luck and have fun.